You really thought you belonged here? The words cut through the soft hum of champagne glasses and polite laughter like a sudden crack in glass. Sharp enough to turn heads, but subtle enough to still fit inside a room built on appearances. And Naomi Carter stood at the entrance of the luxury gala, her posture straight, her expression calm, as if the moment unfolding in front of her was something she had already seen before, something predictable, something almost routine. And yet the woman standing across from her, Victoria Sinclair, held her gaze with a confidence that came from years of never being questioned in rooms like this. Her designer gown catching the golden light of the chandeliers, her presence commanding the attention of nearby guests who now slowed their conversations just enough to listen without appearing obvious. And Naomi did not respond immediately. Not because she did not have an answer, but because she understood something far more important than the question itself. And that understanding was written not in her words, but in the stillness of her composure. And the security guard at the entrance shifted slightly, uncertain, glancing between the two women as if waiting for a signal to act. But Victoria did not need to raise her voice again. Her tone remained controlled, polished, yet unmistakably dismissive as she continued. This event is invitation only. And the implication behind the sentence hung heavier than the words themselves, suggesting not just exclusion but judgment, the kind that does not ask for proof because it assumes it already knows the answer. And Naomi's eyes moved briefly past her, taking in the room beyond, the polished marble floors, the carefully arranged tables, the stage at the far end where a spotlight waited for the evening's most important moment, and then back to Victoria, her gaze steady, unshaken, and for a second, just a second, something in that silence unsettled the rhythm of the room, because it was not the silence of hesitation, it was the silence of control, and the event staff nearby began to notice, their movements slowing, their attention shifting subtly toward Naomi as if something about her presence did not align with the assumption that had just been made. But Victoria did not step back. She leaned slightly forward instead, closing the space between them just enough to assert dominance without breaking decorum. "I can have someone escort you out," she added, her voice smooth, almost polite, but carrying a finality that suggested the decision had already been made. And the guard straightened at that, ready to act, yet still waiting, because something in Naomi's stillness made even authority hesitate. And Naomi finally spoke, her voice calm, even, not raised, not defensive. "Is that how this evening begins?" she asked, and the question did not challenge, it did not accuse, it simply existed. And in that moment it shifted the energy in a way that no louder response could have, because it reframed the situation from confrontation to observation, from reaction to awareness. And Victoria's expression tightened just slightly, not enough for most to notice, but enough to signal that the exchange was no longer unfolding exactly as she had expected. And around them the quiet attention of the room began to settle more fully, conversations fading, eyes turning, because something about this interaction carried a weight that extended beyond two individuals, something that hinted at a deeper structure beneath the polished surface of the gala. And Naomi did not move. She did not step forward. She did not step back. She simply remained, her presence steady, her composure intact, as if the outcome of this moment had already been decided somewhere beyond what anyone in the room could currently see. And in that stillness, the first crack in the illusion of control began to form, subtle, almost invisible, but undeniable for those who knew how to look. The air in the room did not break. It tightened, stretching thin across the polished marble and gold-lit walls as the silence Naomi Carter left behind settled deeper than any raised voice ever could. And for a moment no one moved. Not the guard, not the staff, not even Victoria Sinclair, whose confidence now held just a faint, almost imperceptible hesitation, the kind that only appears when control is no longer absolute. And the surrounding guests, dressed in tailored tuxedos and couture gowns, shifted subtly in place, their conversations fading into low murmurs as their attention anchored to the entrance, because something about the interaction no longer felt like a simple misunderstanding. It felt like a fracture in the carefully constructed order of the evening. And Naomi remained exactly where she stood, her posture unchanged, her expression calm, as if the weight of the moment did not press on her, but instead moved around her, unable to settle, and the staff closest to the doorway began to exchange quiet glances, small signals passing between them that suggested uncertainty, not about the rules, but about their application, because rules rely on recognition, and recognition in that moment had begun to falter, and Victoria straightened slightly, reclaiming her stance, her voice smooth once again, though now carrying a sharper edge beneath the surface. "I think we are done here," she said, her tone final, directing the statement more to the staff than to Naomi, as if reinforcing the authority she believed remained unquestioned, and the guard took a small step forward, not aggressive, not forceful, but enough to signal intention. Yet even that movement lacked certainty, his eyes flickering briefly toward the event staff, waiting for confirmation that did not immediately come, and Naomi's gaze followed the shift, not with concern, not with resistance, but with a quiet awareness that seemed to measure more than the moment itself, and she spoke again, her voice steady, composed. "Before you decide what happens next, you might want to be sure." And the sentence did not challenge, it did not warn, it simply existed, but in its simplicity it introduced doubt, and doubt in a room built on certainty spreads quickly, subtle but powerful, and the nearest event coordinator, a man who had been standing just beyond the immediate circle, glanced down at his tablet, his fingers moving quickly across the screen as if verifying something that should have already been clear. And his expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough to be noticed by those paying close attention, and Victoria caught it, her eyes narrowing slightly, her composure still intact but now layered with a growing impatience. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice controlled but firmer, directing the question toward the staff rather than Naomi, because the narrative she was maintaining required the focus to remain external, and the coordinator hesitated for a fraction of a second before responding. "Just confirming the guest list," he said, his tone neutral, but the fact that confirmation was needed at all altered the balance of the moment, because in spaces like this, everything is supposed to be known in advance, everything accounted for, and uncertainty has no place, and yet it was now present, undeniable, and Naomi did not move, did not step forward into the room or retreat from it. She simply remained, her stillness now carrying a different kind of presence, one that drew attention not by demand but by contrast, because while others adjusted, she did not, and that consistency began to shift perception, slowly, almost imperceptibly, but enough to change the way the moment was understood, and around them the gala continued in fragments. Servers moving carefully, guests pretending to resume their conversations, but the focus lingered, because something unresolved held the space, something that suggested the outcome was not yet determined, and Victoria, sensing the shift but not fully understanding it, took a small step closer, her voice lower now, more controlled. "You are holding up the entire event," she said, and the words were meant to reassert control, to frame Naomi as the disruption. But the effect was not what she intended, because by then the room had already begun to question that assumption, and in that subtle shift, the invisible wall that had once separated Naomi from the space began to weaken, not visibly, not dramatically, but enough that those paying attention could feel it, the first sign that the narrative was no longer singular, that something else, something deeper, was beginning to take shape beneath the surface of the evening. The hesitation that had begun as a flicker now settled into something more defined, something that could not be easily dismissed, and Naomi Carter remained exactly where she stood, her stillness no longer interpreted as uncertainty, but as something far more deliberate, something that began to reshape the rhythm of the room without a single raised voice, and the event coordinator's fingers moved faster across his tablet, his eyes scanning, pausing, returning to the top of the list as if the answer he was looking for had been there all along, but had simply been overlooked, and that small break in certainty rippled outward, subtle but undeniable, because in a space where everything is curated, even the smallest inconsistency demands attention, and Victoria Sinclair noticed it, her gaze narrowing slightly as she watched the shift in the staff's behavior, the delay that should not exist, the confirmation that should not be necessary, and for the first time since the moment began, her confidence encountered resistance, not from Naomi directly, but from the environment itself, and that difference mattered, because confrontation can be dismissed, but systems cannot, and she stepped forward again, her voice controlled but firmer. "If there is an issue, resolve it quickly," she said, directing her words toward the coordinator, not Naomi, as if reinforcing that the situation was procedural, not personal. And the coordinator nodded, but the response came a fraction too late, his attention still divided, still searching, and Naomi watched it all with quiet awareness, her gaze moving once across the room. Not lingering on the guests who now pretended not to stare, not on the guard who had stopped advancing entirely, but toward the stage at the far end, where preparations continued in a rhythm that no longer matched the tension at the entrance, and then back again, as if measuring the distance between what was happening and what was about to happen. And she spoke, her voice calm. "Even, you are looking in the wrong place." And the statement was simple, almost conversational, but it shifted the focus immediately, because it introduced the possibility that the answer did not lie where it was expected. And the coordinator froze for a brief second, his eyes lifting from the screen to meet hers, uncertainty now visible, not hidden. And Victoria turned sharply toward Naomi, her composure tightening. "This is not your concern," she said, her tone sharper now, less polished, because control that has to be asserted begins to lose its natural authority. And Naomi did not react to the tone. She did not match it. She simply held her position, her presence steady, and that steadiness continued to contrast everything around her, the shifting staff, the watching guests, the tightening posture of Victoria herself. And somewhere behind the immediate circle, another staff member moved quickly toward the coordinator, leaning in, speaking, in a low voice that did not carry far, but carried enough weight to change his expression entirely, his posture straightening, his attention sharpening, as if a missing piece had just been found. And he looked back down at the tablet, his fingers moving again, this time with certainty. And that certainty altered the air in a way that no announcement had yet made. Because recognition begins before it is spoken, it appears first in behavior, in posture, in the subtle shift of how people stand, how they look, how they decide. And that shift was now unmistakable. The staff no longer hesitating in the same way, no longer looking to Victoria for direction, but instead aligning themselves with something else, something not yet visible, but already influencing the structure of the moment. And Victoria felt it, even if she did not fully understand it. Her stance tightening, her gaze moving quickly between Naomi and the staff, searching for confirmation that no longer came as easily. And Naomi remained still, her expression calm, her presence unwavering, as if she had always known this point would arrive, not as a surprise, but as a certainty. And in that quiet certainty, the foundation of the evening continued to shift, slowly, steadily, moving away from assumption and towards something that could no longer be ignored. The shift that had begun as uncertainty now started to take shape as direction, not announced, not declared, but visible in the way the staff repositioned themselves, in the way their attention moved away from Victoria Sinclair and towards something else, something that had not yet been spoken but was already being acknowledged. And Naomi Carter stood at the center of that shift without moving a single step, her composure unchanged, her presence steady, as if she was not reacting to the moment, but allowing it to unfold exactly as it was meant to. And the event coordinator's posture straightened fully now, his earlier hesitation replaced by a quiet urgency, his eyes fixed on the tablet in his hand before lifting again toward Naomi with a look that carried recognition, not complete, not fully expressed, but undeniable. And Victoria noticed it instantly, the way his attention no longer returned to her first, the way his body angled slightly away from her authority. And that subtle redirection unsettled the structure she had relied on from the beginning. And she stepped forward again, her voice sharper now, less controlled than before. "What exactly are you confirming?" she asked. The question directed at the coordinator but charged with an expectation of immediate clarity. And the coordinator hesitated, just briefly, as if choosing his words carefully, not out of uncertainty this time, but out of awareness that whatever he said next would redefine the moment entirely. And before he could respond, another figure approached from deeper within the gala, a senior event director. Their presence marked not by volume, but by the quiet way the surrounding staff adjusted as they passed, creating space without being asked. And the director's gaze moved quickly across the scene, taking in the positioning, the tension, the unresolved interaction, before settling on Naomi. And in that instant, something shifted again, something more definitive, because recognition at that level does not hesitate. It aligns immediately, and the director stepped closer, their tone calm, professional, but carrying a subtle respect that had not been present before. There seems to be a misunderstanding, they said, not to Naomi, not to Victoria, but to the space itself, reframing the situation without assigning blame. And Victoria turned toward them, relief flickering briefly across her expression as she prepared to reassert her position. Yes, there is, she said quickly, her voice regaining some of its earlier confidence. She is not on the list. And the certainty in her statement returned for a moment, reinforced by habit more than evidence. But the director did not respond immediately, their attention still on Naomi, as if verifying something beyond what had already been said. And Naomi met that gaze without change, her expression calm, her posture steady, offering nothing more than presence. And the director nodded, slightly, almost imperceptibly, before turning back to the coordinator. Pull up the full registry, they said, their voice quiet but decisive. And the instruction carried weight, not because it was loud, but because it came from a place that did not require reinforcement. And the coordinator moved quickly now, the tablet responding under his hands as he accessed a deeper layer of information, something beyond the visible guest list. And as he did, the surrounding staff leaned in just enough to signal attention, their earlier uncertainty replaced by focus. And Victoria stood still, her gaze moving between them, her confidence now intersecting with a growing awareness that the situation had moved beyond her control. And Naomi remained where she was, unchanged, unshaken, her presence now fully integrated into the space that had moments ago rejected her. And in that integration, the final boundaries that had separated her from the Gala began to dissolve, not through force, not through argument, but through the quiet alignment of recognition and authority. And as the coordinator's expression shifted once more, this time unmistakably, the moment edged closer to its revelation, the point where assumption would no longer hold, and reality would take its place. The air in the Gala no longer felt like a seamless flow of curated elegance. It felt segmented, divided between what had been assumed and what was now being uncovered. And the event coordinator's hand slowed for the first time since he had begun navigating the deeper registry, his eyes scanning the screen with a focus that had shifted from searching to confirming. And that distinction altered everything, because searching carries uncertainty, but confirmation carries consequence. And the senior event director remained still beside him, their presence composed yet attentive, as if allowing the information to surface fully before acting on it. And Victoria Sinclair stood just a few feet away, her posture still upright, her expression controlled, but now carrying a tension that no longer came from dominance, but from the absence of it. Because the system she had relied on was no longer reinforcing her position, and that realization began to settle in ways she could not immediately correct. And Naomi Carter remained exactly where she had been from the start, her stillness now no longer contrasted against the room, but integrated within it, as if the space itself had begun to recognize her in a way it had not before. And the surrounding guests, though maintaining the appearance of casual conversation, had shifted their attention more openly now, their glances no longer subtle, their curiosity no longer concealed, because the unfolding moment carried a weight that extended beyond social discomfort into something far more compelling. And the coordinator finally looked up from the tablet. His expression changed in a way that did not need explanation. The kind of change that comes when information aligns too clearly to be ignored. And he turned slightly toward the event director, lowering his voice, but not enough to prevent those closest from sensing the shift. And the director listened, their expression remaining neutral, but their eyes moving briefly toward Naomi with a recognition that had now become undeniable. And that single glance marked the transition from uncertainty to acknowledgement. And Victoria saw it, the way the director's attention settled, the way the staff no longer looked to her first. And for a moment her composure tightened, not breaking, but holding against a pressure that had not existed before. And she spoke again, her tone measured but edged with urgency. I assume this is being handled, she said. The statement less a question than an attempt to reclaim the narrative. But the director did not respond immediately, instead taking a small step forward, their focus now fully aligned with Naomi. And when they spoke, their voice remained calm, but carried a clarity that shifted the entire dynamic. "We are ensuring everything proceeds as intended," they said, and the phrasing, while neutral, no longer centered Victoria as the authority. It repositioned the situation within a larger framework, one that she did not control, and Naomi's gaze met the director's briefly, not an acknowledgement, not an expectation, but in a quiet alignment that required no further explanation, and that alignment was felt, not just seen, because the staff closest to them adjusted their posture again, their movements becoming more precise, more intentional, as if guided by a structure that had now revealed itself fully, and the coordinator stepped back slightly, creating space, not out of hesitation, but out of recognition, and in that space, the hierarchy of the room began to reassemble itself, not according to assumption, but according to truth, and Victoria remained where she was, her presence still strong, but no longer central, her authority still visible, but no longer dominant, and Naomi, without moving, without speaking, had become the fixed point around which everything else now adjusted. And as that realization settled into the room, the moment reached a threshold where the next step would no longer be subtle. It would be visible, undeniable, and once it arrived, there would be no returning to what had been assumed before. The moment no longer hovered in uncertainty. It began to move with direction, and that direction did not come from raised voices or visible commands. It came from alignment, the kind that happens when recognition reaches a level that cannot be ignored, and the senior event director took another step forward, their posture composed but purposeful, their attention fully centered on Naomi Carter, not as a guest being evaluated, but as someone already understood within a context that had not yet been made public, and the surrounding staff adjusted almost instinctively, their positions shifting to create a subtle but unmistakable path inward, a quiet opening that had not existed before, and Naomi remained still for a brief moment longer, her gaze steady, her expression unchanged, as if allowing the room to complete its transition before she moved within it. And Victoria Sinclair watched closely, her composure still held together by habit, but now intersected by something she could no longer control, because the space that had once reinforced her authority was now reorganizing itself without her input, and that absence of control created a tension she could not immediately resolve. And the event director spoke again, their tone calm but definitive. "Ms. Carter," they said, and the use of the name, spoken clearly, without hesitation, carried a weight that extended beyond simple identification. It was recognition, formal, precise, and public, and the effect was immediate, the surrounding staff straightening slightly, their attention sharpening, the quiet murmur of the guests shifting into something more focused, because a name changes a moment, it anchors it, gives it structure. And Naomi responded with a slight nod, nothing more, her acknowledgement measured, controlled, as if confirming something that had already been understood rather than receiving something new, and the director continued, "We have been expecting you." And that sentence, simple as it was, altered the entire narrative, because expectation implies importance, it implies planning. It implies a role that extends beyond presence. And Victoria's expression tightened, not dramatically, but enough to reveal the fracture in her certainty, because the framework she had been operating within no longer held, and the coordinator stepped slightly to the side, clearing the space completely now, no longer positioned as a barrier, but as support, and the director gestured gently toward the interior of the gala, toward the stage where the evening's central focus awaited. "If you would, join us," they said, and the invitation was not casual. It was structured, deliberate, aligned with a purpose that had not yet been revealed, but was now undeniably present. And Naomi finally moved, her step forward calm, unhurried, her presence carrying through the space not as an intrusion, but as a continuation, as if she had always belonged within it, and the room had simply taken time to catch up. And as she passed, the staff adjusted seamlessly, creating space without disruption, their earlier uncertainty replaced by precision, and the guests, now openly watching, followed her movement with a focus that no longer questioned her place, but sought to understand it. And Victoria remained where she stood, her position unchanged physically, but fundamentally altered in meaning, because the center of attention had shifted completely, not through confrontation, not through argument, but through recognition. And as Naomi moved deeper into the gala, toward the stage that now seemed less distant and more inevitable, the balance of the evening completed its transition, the invisible structure that governs power settling into its true form, leaving no doubt that what was about to unfold would not be a correction, but a revelation. The movement toward the center of the gala did not feel like a transition. It felt like a correction, as if the space itself had been waiting for alignment and had now finally found it. And Naomi Carter walked forward with the same calm presence she had carried from the entrance, her pace steady, unhurried, her expression unchanged, yet everything around her responded differently now. The staff adjusting their positions with quiet precision, the guests no longer pretending not to watch, their attention openly following her path as if drawn by something they could not fully explain but instinctively understood, and the stage ahead, once distant, now seemed to pull the entire room toward it, the lighting shifting subtly as preparations reached a new phase, and behind her, the space she had just crossed no longer held the same weight. Because the focus had moved entirely forward, leaving Victoria Sinclair standing at the edge of a moment that no longer belonged to her. And she remained still, her posture composed but no longer commanding, her gaze fixed on Naomi with attention that had replaced certainty, because what had begun as a controlled situation had transformed into something she could not interrupt. And the senior event director walked just slightly ahead of Naomi now, not leading, not guiding, but aligning, their presence reinforcing the direction without overshadowing it. And as they approached the base of the stage, another staff member stepped forward, their voice low but clear. "We are ready," they said, not as a question, but as confirmation, and the phrase carried through the immediate area, enough for those closest to hear. Enough to shift the anticipation into something tangible, and Naomi paused for a brief moment at the edge of the stage, her gaze lifting toward the room, taking in the gathered guests, the structure of the event, the atmosphere that had moments ago rejected her and now awaited her. And that pause was not hesitation. It was control, the kind that defines the timing of a moment rather than reacting to it. And the director turned slightly toward her, their tone respectful. "Whenever you are ready," they said, and the words, simple as they were, confirmed everything that had been building, because readiness in this context did not refer to preparation. It referred to permission, and Naomi did not rush. She did not speak immediately. She simply stepped forward, ascending the stage with a presence that did not need to announce itself. Because by then the room had already begun to understand, and the subtle background music faded just enough to allow the shift in attention to settle fully. Conversation stopping entirely now, the room aligning in a single direction, and from across the space, Victoria watched as the final distance between assumption and reality closed, her position unchanged physically, but increasingly distant in influence. And the staff who had once looked to her now faced forward, their attention fixed on the stage, their alignment complete, and Naomi reached the center, the light catching her now in a way that no longer felt accidental, but intentional, as if the entire structure of the evening had adjusted to meet her presence. And in that moment, before a single word was spoken, the truth had already begun to surface, not through declaration, but through position, because where someone stands in a room like this defines everything. And Naomi Carter now stood exactly where she had always belonged, not at the edge, not at the entrance, but at the center of the narrative itself, where control is not claimed, it is recognized. The silence that settled over the gala was no longer uncertain. It was deliberate, shaped by expectation, held in place by the presence now standing at the center of the stage, and Naomi Carter did not rush to fill it. She allowed it to exist, to stretch just long enough for every eye in the room to adjust, to recalibrate, to understand that the moment they were witnessing was no longer part of the program they had anticipated, but something far more significant. And when she finally spoke, her voice was calm, steady, carrying effortlessly across the room without the need for amplification. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she said, and the simplicity of the words contrasted with the weight behind them, because the tone did not belong to someone invited to speak. It belonged to someone who defined the event itself. And the guests felt it, not as a sudden shock, but as a gradual realization that moved through the room in waves, subtle yet undeniable. And the senior event director stepped just out of the direct light, allowing the focus to remain entirely on Naomi. Their earlier alignment now fully transitioned into support, and Naomi continued, her gaze moving across the audience, not searching, not seeking approval, but acknowledging presence. Events like this are built on vision, she said, her words measured, precise, on the belief that bringing the right people together creates something greater than the moment itself. And as she spoke, the earlier tension dissolved into something else, something quieter, something rooted in understanding rather than conflict. And across the room, Victoria Sinclair stood motionless, her attention fixed on the stage. The distance between where she stood and where Naomi now stood no longer measured in feet, but in position, in influence, in recognition, and Naomi's voice remained steady as she continued. But vision only works when it is aligned with truth. And that sentence shifted the energy again, not dramatically, but with a clarity that reached those who had been paying attention from the beginning, those who had seen the interaction at the entrance, who now began to connect the sequence of events into something cohesive, something intentional. And Naomi paused briefly, her gaze settling toward the far end of the room before returning to center. Tonight was never just about the program, she said. It was about what we choose to see and what we overlook. And the words carried a quiet resonance, not directed at any one person, not framed as accusation, but understood by those who needed to understand them. And the staff remained perfectly still, their earlier movements replaced by a stillness that mirrored the audience, because the moment had reached its point of clarity. And Naomi took a small step forward, the light following her naturally, as if responding rather than directing. As the primary investor behind this initiative, she said, and the sentence, delivered without emphasis, without dramatic pause, landed with a weight that did not require repetition, because its meaning was immediate, complete, and irreversible. And a subtle shift moved through the room, not loud, not disruptive, but present in the way people straightened, in the way their expressions changed, in the way attention deepened into recognition. And Naomi did not linger on the statement. She did not expand on it. She allowed it to exist exactly as it was, a fact, a truth, a foundation. And in that moment, the entire structure of the evening realigned itself fully, every earlier assumption dissolving under the clarity of what had just been revealed. And across the room, Victoria remained still, her posture composed but no longer anchored in the same certainty, because the narrative had moved beyond her reach. And Naomi, standing at the center of it, did not claim control. She simply existed within it, and that existence defined everything. The revelation did not echo loudly through the room. It settled, deep and complete, as if every person present understood at the same moment that the narrative they had witnessed from the entrance to the stage had never been what it appeared to be. And Naomi Carter stood at the center of that realization without shifting her posture, without altering her tone, because nothing about her needed to change for the truth to take its full shape. And the audience, once filled with quiet assumptions, now held a different kind of silence, one built on recognition rather than curiosity. And across the space, Victoria Sinclair remained still, her composure intact on the surface, but no longer supported by the structure that had once reinforced it, because authority that relies on perception cannot survive once that perception is corrected. And Naomi allowed the moment to settle fully before continuing, her voice steady, her words precise. Respect is not granted by appearance, she said, and the sentence moved through the room with a clarity that required no emphasis. It is revealed through understanding. And she did not look toward Victoria when she spoke. She did not single out the moment that had unfolded earlier, because the power of what she was saying did not come from confrontation. It came from placement, from standing exactly where the truth had positioned her. And the staff remained aligned, their posture reflecting a certainty that had replaced all earlier hesitation. And the event director stood just outside the center of the stage, their presence now fully supportive, no longer corrective, because the need for correction had passed. And Naomi took a small step forward, the light following naturally, as if the space itself had adjusted permanently. Tonight was meant to celebrate vision, she continued, and vision only works when it includes clarity. And the room listened, not out of obligation, but because the moment demanded it, because what had begun as a quiet confrontation had evolved into something far more meaningful, a demonstration not of conflict, but of truth revealed through time. And she paused once more, allowing the weight of the statement to settle before finishing. Clarity does not raise its voice, she said. It simply stands where it belongs. And with that, the message was complete, not extended, not repeated, because it did not need to be, and the audience responded not with immediate applause, but with a brief, collective stillness. The kind that marks a shift in understanding before it becomes reaction. And then, gradually, the sound followed, measured, respectful, building as the room adjusted to what had just been witnessed, not just a speech, but a correction of perspective. And Naomi did not react to the applause with exaggeration. She acknowledged it with the same calm presence she had carried from the beginning. Because her position did not depend on their response, it had already been established, and as she stepped back slightly, allowing the event to continue within its new alignment, the structure of the evening settled into its final form, one where assumption had been replaced by recognition, and where presence had redefined authority without force, without spectacle, leaving behind a clarity that could not be undone, because once it is seen, it remains, shaping everything that follows in quiet, undeniable ways.